Do we like the shot? We like the shot, right? We do. Hi, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Thinking Out Loud. This is the You're on the Road in Cleveland for TNF edition of Thinking Out Loud. Before we get to week number 12, believe it or not, of the NFL season, the last full week before Thanksgiving, before all the games on Thanksgiving, the Black Friday game, and then everything thereafter. It's getting to be that time of the year where it's cold, the weather is nasty, that would affect games. It's playoff weather, and it's a playoff atmosphere. Like I mentioned, I'm in Cleveland. We have tomorrow potentially 35-mile-an-hour winds, rain, sleet, snow, just awesome football. AFC North weather for the Larry Ogunjobi grudge match, the return of Larry Ogunjobi to Cleveland. I kid. That's not the headline of the game. We'll get to that one a little bit later. Either way, there's a lot going on. We're not going to do a full preview show this week because, honestly, time is of the essence. We are going to preview the two big games coming up on Sunday and on Monday night, and they are both at SoFi Stadium. For the second time in 3 weeks, we have back-to-back primetime games for the Rams and the Chargers at SoFi Stadium. There's also other news around the league. And before we do any of that, let's say hello back in Los Angeles, where it's probably 70 and sunny, to Sam Batesh.
Andrew, yes, it is quite nice here, and I don't mean to rub it in, but the fact that we're talking about primetime games in Los Angeles, yes, I'll let you know what you're missing in Los Angeles. It's quite lovely. However, I love that you are in real football weather, and as Bill Belichick likes to say, the season doesn't really start until after Thanksgiving. So we're kind of getting there, right? I mean, we're getting to that part of the season where, hopefully we'll start to see snow on the ground, et cetera. Those are always my favorite games to watch, certainly. But for you, what a week. I mean, Thursday night football. And then also, I know we'll see you on Saturday as well. It's quite a whirlwind week for you. And so we're thrilled to get this done here.
Got a college game coming up on Saturday. But let's focus on the news here from around the league before we get to the games coming up on Sunday or Monday. And that was a Tuesday bomb, if you will, out of New York, with the Jets firing their general manager, Joe Douglas. Now, a couple of things. Obviously, they're losing. Nobody thought Joe Douglas would be back next year. They hadn't given him a contract in the offseason. He was, as of 2 days ago, the only general manager in the NFL working without a contract. So what does that tell you? Odds are, because your head coach is already fired, the GM will likely be fired as well. Doing it now doesn't make a lot of sense unless you pull back some of the layers. Let's do that a little bit. There is very little to be done for any GM after the trade deadline. The only thing that really needs to be done is basic roster maintenance. If somebody has to go on injured reserve and you have to bring up a practice squad guy, or sometimes you are signing street free agents, but for a team that is out of the playoffs for all intents and purposes, there really isn't a lot to do. You're signing maybe guys to futures contracts at the end of the regular season. You're just doing bottom of the roster churning stuff. Here in Cleveland, the Browns signed Jerron Christian, the offensive lineman, off the Rams practice squad. That's an example of a move that a team might make down the stretch after the deadline. You need a body. There's a guy that's familiar with your system, has been in your building. You go bring him in. It's that kind of stuff. The Mike Williams move was already made. The Devontae Adams move was already made. The big picture stuff was already done. So firing a GM after the trade deadline is often seen, I don't want to say as spiteful, but it's doing it just for the sake of doing it and getting it over with. Now, I told you, was it last week, Sam, 2 weeks ago, that I thought the only question left in New York, it's not, are they going to make the playoffs? It's not, is the coach fired? That's already been done. The only question was, is Aaron Rodgers back next year? Does he just retire? Does he walk away? But I told you, every indication is it's over. Like, this is his last season with the Jets, and this to me, absolutely wraps it up. You throw in this story in The Athletic this week that said that after week 4, after the embarrassing loss in horrible weather to the Broncos at MetLife Stadium, Woody Johnson had to be talked out of benching Aaron Rodgers, that he demanded he be fired. And then bench. And then when they didn't bench him, he fired Robert Saleh the next day or the next Monday after not telling anybody. I mean, Joe Douglas was thrown a lifeline by being told to go home early.
Andrew, I have a soft spot in my heart for Joe Douglas, much like I do anyone that is tied to the Eagles 2017 championship team. And of course, Joe worked with Howie Roseman in that front office for that span from 2016 to 2019, basically. And so there's part of me that always has that affinity for Joe Douglas and what he did. But the problem here is, yes, you can talk about Aaron Rodgers. And by the way, yes, we were certainly talking about Aaron Rodgers and where his future will be, not in New York. And we were playing around with some ideas I threw out there. Maybe he'd follow Favre and go to the Vikings now, much like Brett went from Green Bay to New York, then to Minnesota. But forget about that point right now. The quarterback I want to talk about is Zach Wilson. That's ultimately what a lot of this comes down to, isn't it? I mean, in the end, when you get that wrong.
Yeah, they got it wrong.
Right? I mean, when you miss it,
you got it wrong.
It hurts so much, right? And it puts so much in motion that you then have to sort of make it right from there. And that's ultimately what seems to be the worst move here. I mean, as far as Joe Douglas's tenure is concerned, it felt like, oh, Aaron Rodgers was this chance to save it all. Not to mention, despite the Zach Wilson thing, think about this for Joe Douglas. Offensive Rookie of the Year, Defensive Rookie of the Year, in regards to what you had in Garrett Wilson and in Sauce Gardner.
He's drafted fine.
Right? Other than
Zach Wilson.
That'll hurt you, right? That ultimately, it's that position that hurts because, again, we just talked about huge wins in Sauce and Garrett, but this Rodgers thing will be the sort of last terrible taste in the mouth of this tenure, and that's it. But you said it, Andrew. This means now start over, and what do you got, right? This is essentially everything from this season will now be undone into next season. Maybe you're looking at Breece Hall and Braylon Allen and Garrett Wilson, but I would imagine, Devontae Adams, Aaron Rodgers, nothing that seems to happen with anyone in the coaching staff, right? I mean, you would think certainly Hackett, forget it if he's not already just left and hanging out, and Ulbrich. It seems like it's just all done at this point for the Jets.
And if you read the Athletic article, and there's no reason to not believe it, said Woody Johnson had a heavy hand. Woody Johnson was behind a lot of these moves, which is, by the way, the typical spin after anybody gets fired. It wasn't me, it was the owner. But a lot of it is very believable. Woody Johnson wanted Aaron Rodgers. Woody Johnson pushed for Devontae Adams. And those moves got made. And look, the Jets are 3-8. They're going to have to clean house. But going back to the initial, why are they doing it now? My gut tells me, and actually I believe pretty strongly, that Woody Johnson is once again going to be named the ambassador to His Majesty's United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. And once he goes back to London representing these United States and the Trump administration, the rules are basically you can't run the team. And that Christopher Johnson, his brother, will go back to running the team. And I think a huge part of this is Woody wants this move done now. So before the new administration takes over in January, he can get his hands dirty. And, well, I mean, he owns the team, but he can have a hand in the hiring of not only the coach, but the general manager. Now, can he be texting or WhatsApping from London? Of course he can. But really, his brother would take over the team. He wants a bigger say, and he wants to do all this now. Phil Savage taking over doesn't change anything. My point about Aaron Rodgers, I will write it down right now. He ain't going to be a Jet next year. And I think the question is, who would want him? I'm not saying nobody wants him, but we may have to play the game of the offseason. How many teams, and the list may not be long, want Aaron Rodgers after watching him play this year?
One quick question, Andrew. Is this about Aaron Rodgers? You and I both had the Jets as one of the new playoff teams for this season. In fact, I had even
said twisted my arm.
You're right. It was only because we sort of had to, right? We sort of had to. We were just, I mean, we were throwing it out there. We thought, okay, look, there's going to be 4 at least new playoff teams. Who could they be? Jets felt interesting. They simply did, right? I mean, defensively, there were things that we liked in Saleh and what had happened the previous season. But the question is Is this about Rodgers or is it about something else?
It's about 3-8.
But what I mean, my
3-8.
question is 3-8? Are we hanging that on Aaron Rodgers, or is there something else? Because it feels, is it most tied to Rodgers or not?
Yeah, that's not fair to. I mean, it's on
not.
Everybody.
You're absolutely
it's on
right.
everybody.
But to your point,
who spent money on Tyron Smith thinking he could still play? I mean,
and now for next season, who could it be? And I think you and I've thrown out. I mean, again, I said Raiders, and you kind of laughed at that as well.
I don't think he's going to play next year. I don't think unless matter of fact, Mike Florio in Pro Football Talk had a great point today. I'll tip the cap to him. After this story gets leaked that Woody Johnson wanted about, does Aaron Rodgers just come in after the bye and say, "Cut me, I'm out, get me out of here"? Make it a soldier's death, right? Gladiator 2 is coming out. Just get it over with. You know what? Why not? Let me go sign somewhere else. Somebody needs someone's quarterback gets hurt this weekend. Let me go there. Now, does anyone really want him again next year? That's the big question. But he won't be a Jet. The Jets have to rebuild. Let me tip my cap real quick to my buddy Daniel Jeremiah, who pointed out on his pod yesterday. Remember, Zach Wilson came after Trevor Lawrence. Right? Trevor Lawrence has had his moments, right? But they're legitimate questions. Can Trevor Lawrence truly be the guy? They paid him. Whose situation would you rather have right now? The Jets, where you can go find a new quarterback next year, and you're going to have a top 5 pick in all likelihood, and you can start over with a rookie quarterback contract? Or would you rather be the Jaguars, who are probably going to have a new coach and maybe new GM, but are tied financially to Trevor Lawrence? I don't know that there's a right answer, but it's a good conversation.
I think it's an easy answer. The bottom line is, to have that much money committed to Trevor at this point feels worse, period. Bottom line is that starting over feels better.
I think he could play. I think he could still play. They've already gone to the playoffs with him.
But
right, they made a run. They had their moment.
But as you like to say, quarterback contract is not necessarily about just stacking the best and saying who makes the most. It's when are you up for your deal, period. And if you're a starting quarterback, you're getting that 50, you're getting that 60. That's just how it goes. Daniel Jones was a little bit in the middle. We all know how that has now ended up, but it feels worse to be tied to something at a 50 million price tag. That feels worse no matter what way you spin that.
Yeah. It probably does, but I said at the time, you have to make the deal, because you know what? The price is only going up. If you think he's the guy, make the deal. They made the deal. Now the deal doesn't look so great, but they're not the first to make a deal and then go, I don't know. Funny how everything changes in a year. All right, we're short on time here, so let's get to these 2 games, Sam, as we promised we would. And we'll do the NFC game first, the Sunday night game at SoFi Stadium. Football Night in America, the biggest, most watched television show in these United States on a week in, week out basis. The Rams of Los Angeles at 5-5, the 8th seed currently in the NFC, against the Philadelphia Eagles, leaders of the East, soon to be winners of the East, 8-2, the 2 seed. If LA can get to the 7 seed, and they right now are 2.5 games back of the Commanders, but if they could do that, they're 2 games back in the win column. This would actually be a potential wild card weekend game, because I think the Lions are going to be the 1 seed. I don't see the Eagles catching them. I'm sorry. This could be a 7-2 wild card weekend game. Rams are coming off a long trip. It's a weird setup here. They go prime time Monday night all the way to New England, then come back to play Sunday night on a short week at home in prime time. It is an odd setup here, and not a favorable setup in any way, shape, or form. But Matthew Stafford is coming off his best game of the season. He had a great effort week 1. The offensive line fell apart. He had that great comeback against the 49ers. He's had his moments, but this performance was beautiful. It was a masterpiece. The Rams offensive line looked the part again. Maybe they got that figured out. Bo Limmer back at center. They got that figured out. There are going to be a lot of Eagles fans there. A lot. Because Eagles fans travel well. And this game last year, I was at this one last year, second straight year, the Eagles come here. to play the Rams in LA. It was all Philly. I'll just be blunt. It was a lot of Philly. The Rams, it would behoove their fans if they showed up. I hope they do. I think I might be there. It really comes down to, can the Eagles and can their pass defense slow down Matthew Stafford, Puka Nacua, and Cooper Kupp? I am all here for the Quinyon Mitchell against Puka matchup, if we have that. The kid from Toledo, rookie cornerback for the Eagles. It's a matchup, in my estimation, worth the price of admission. I think the Eagles have to stumble. They're on a heater. Sam, I'm calling it right now. This is their game in which they stumble.
It looks like that, Andrew. I want to say, that I want to say Eagles win this game. And by the way, I do hope you're there. I'm going to end up at this one as well. And last year, Allie convinced me to go to that game, October 8th of last season. The Eagles really bullied their way to a win in that one. I mean, if you go back and look at sort of the tush-push conversation was happening a lot going into that game, and then the Eagles used that play 5 times in that game. It was a really huge part. In fact, they even put the game away with the tush-push in the end. That was a humongous part of that game, and it was a close ball game, and it was earlier in the season, and the Rams were not looking great at that point. But McVay is 1-3 versus the Eagles. And it's happened a lot. These two teams play each other more than you would think they really should, in a way. It's a matchup that the league likes to see. The Super Bowl season for the Eagles was the game that Carson Wentz got injured in. That was ultimately the game for the 1 seed that season. And the Eagles played a tremendous game in LA. Wentz got hurt. Foles came in, finished the game out. And as I said, McVay, he's also lost the game the next season. The Eagles came to LA again and won. He's lost all 3 games at home. They actually beat the Eagles in Philly in 2020. This Eagles team is balanced, oddly, Andrew. For how things started, I'm a little surprised that the Eagles have turned it around to this point, to have the number 1 ranked defense when you look at yardage and the number 4 ranked offense. That's just not what this team looked like early in the season at all. And there's been a lot of things.
Week 6, Sam, they weren't good.
You said it. And I had no argument really at that point, because that win in Cleveland was coming off. I'm sorry, in Philly, but it was coming off of a bye, and it was an ugly game. Browns had a chance to win that game really multiple times at the end of the game, and it was not looking good at that point. That team did not look fresh at all. So again, to be this balanced is odd. I would say, for purposes of you and I talking here, and you say Rams, I'll just say Eagles, simply because of all the garb sitting behind me here for Philadelphia. But this is the kind of game, if the Eagles are going to win this game, it's pressure on Stafford. I think it's going to have to be on defense. Of course, Saquon could go off. Yeah, fine. And he certainly has. But this feels like the kind of game where the Eagles defense, and specifically in getting to Stafford, because you said it, I would say of these two quarterbacks, Stafford's the one that's playing better at this point in time.
They put up 400 yards last week. Now, listen, it's the Patriots, but you're on the road. If anyone's ever been to Foxborough, LA to Foxborough is probably as long a flight as there is in the NFL, other than Miami to Seattle, maybe. And then you land in Providence. It's 45 minutes each way to the stadium and the hotel. It's people say, oh, they travel first class. Take my word on it. It's a difficult road trip, regardless of the opponent, and they plastered them.
And by the way, and Drake May, the Patriots have been interesting with Drake May.
Yeah,
let's be clear. Totally. That's been a very competitive team with Drake May. So that was absolutely a game on the road. And as you said, with the travel, the Rams, you could say the Eagles are peaking right now. The Rams are too. The blip on the radar for the Rams, it's that game. It's the game you were at, Andrew. That Monday night game, that Dolphins game for the Rams. I think we're just going to look back at that. And if they're out of this thing by a game at the end, we're going to say they had a chance to beat Detroit week 1 in overtime. That game was absolutely a game the Rams had the lead late and didn't hold on. They were down to one
offensive line.
You're right. Think about how injured they were, and yet they had the Lions, who now we think are the cream of the crop in the entire league. They had them on the ropes. They lost it in overtime. But that hosting the Dolphins at that point in time, at that point in their season, when you look at both of these teams, that's the one that made no sense. This Rams team is on as much of a heater as the Eagles, if not for that game and that hiccup. So this should be as advertised. And you're right, by the way, as you know, being there last year. The Eagles fans definitely know how to fill SoFi. I
Yeah.
mean, that's you're going to see plenty in that game. So again, I think getting to Stafford will be the key in this one.
And the Rams may have to, be great if they actually scored in the first quarter, which is something they don't do. Maybe quiet those Eagles fans, but again, that has not been the trend. That is the Sunday night game, the NBC game at SoFi, and then the second game at SoFi back to back. And tip of the cap to everybody there that turned the place over. It is not easy to do 2 back-to-back games on consecutive nights in the same stadium. Jets and Giants obviously have to go through, but when both games are primetime games on 2 different networks with 2 different TV trucks and all the infrastructure that goes into putting these games on, that is a monumental task. And again, tip of the cap to the people at SoFi. The late game, the second game, beg your pardon, is the ESPN. It's the Monday night game. And that is the Harbaugh Bowl, if you want to call it that. It is the Ravens, the 6 seed, the Chargers, the 5 seed. It is John visiting Jim. I doubt one will stay with the other. It is their first meeting since the Super Bowl back in 2013. If you don't remember, the lights went out in New Orleans. Beyonce blew the power, and the Ravens won 34-31. Joe Flacco bet on himself and won the MVP. It was 13 years and 1 day ago by the time we get to kick off. If this game had been on Sunday, it would be exactly 13 years to the day. Is that right? No, I take it back. It'll be 13 years since their regular season meeting in 2011. So 2 years previous. So this is the third time John has won them both.
Which
so
was a Thanksgiving matchup,
season,
I believe.
Exactly.
Andrew, there was a huge feature on Thanksgiving for that. Yeah,
exactly. And once in the postseason as well. This game comes down really, Sam, to just getting the Ravens offense working again. I just watched their game against the Steelers, and they just couldn't get anything consistently because the Steelers had too much pressure on the run game, too much pressure on Lamar. And also Zay Flowers is dropping passes. You know, if I had $1 for every time Lamar Jackson made a play happen, put it on a guy, they dropped it, I'd have enough to pay for dinner tonight. It happened again last week. And then the turnovers you had, likely getting stripped. You had Derrick Henry getting stripped, and then you had the 2-point conversion play that blew up. The Ravens put so much pressure on Russell Wilson. He was sacked 4 times only in the first half. He got the ball out a lot quicker in the second half, but every time you looked up, he was scrambling, he was running, he was throwing, but then getting hit. I mean, they beat Russell Wilson up, but couldn't win the game. They would have won the game if Justin Tucker had hit his 2 long field goals. He is no longer Mr. Automatic, and the Steelers won the game because they didn't miss a kick. They had 6 Chris Boswell field goals, and he nailed them all. And he has 29 field goals this year, and he's only missed once. And it's the most points. So he has, I believe it's 56. No, I have the number here somewhere. Whatever. He has the highest percentage of a winning team's points since the merger. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So the Steelers offense is so bad in the red zone. Okay. That Chris Boswell has the highest point share. That's a number. His team's total points, percentage-wise, for a winning team this late in the season since the 1970 merger.
And remember, one of those games
couldn't beat him.
Remember, one of those games was with Fields. It was week 1. Mm-hmm. That Falcons win was Boswell won special teams player of the week. And that was sort of the coming out party there. What was in that win? The Harbaugh Bowl, interesting, Andrew, and go back to that Super Bowl real quick. Obviously, the lights went out, and we remember that. But remember how close Jim was to beating John in that game. It was a massive comeback in that game. The Ravens were up huge. I believe it was Jacoby Jones who ran the second half kickoff back to put the Ravens up huge. Then the lights went out, and the Niners make this furious comeback in which you had Kaepernick on about the 4-yard line with a
Jim
chance
called
to
timeout. He was going in.
They were absolutely, it looked like the Niners were about to go up there. It was right after the 2-minute warning. And remember, they went for it 4 times. The first play, I believe LaMichael James ran the ball. They got a yard. And then they went to Crabtree back to to back. Kaepernick trying to hit Crabtree in the back corner of the end zone, and it failed three times.
But legitimately, Harbaugh called timeout on a play in which Kaepernick was going to score, and I will take that to the grave.
It felt like that, and it was just, I mean, what a moment. Obviously, Harbaugh Bowl, everything that you just said. But what's also interesting here is not only are these teams related because of the coaches, what's interesting is the Chargers' run game is sort of the old Ravens run game, right? I mean, you got J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards, and J.K. is this new version of himself. Now, of course, Derrick Henry's having the better season in Baltimore from just running the ball, but J.K. healthy, looking good. He helped salt away that game on Sunday night, although you could argue he should have gone down at the 1 yard line to make that easier for the Chargers. Could have just made a kick instead of having Burrow with a chance in the end zone, and he did hit T. Higgins in the hands. But Dobbins is having a nice resurgent season, and that run game for the Chargers is for real. And remember, as we said it last week, the Chargers defense, number one when it comes to points per game. I mean, granted, the Bengals did score late in that game and in that second half for sure, but 14.5 per game from the Chargers on defense, that could certainly make the difference here. And something to remember, the Ravens, as much as we talk about how terrible they are on defense, the number 2 rushing defense. So, that could play a factor here. Maybe, though, does Herbert take advantage? Is this sort of the Ladd McConkey, Quentin Johnston game? I mean, it could certainly be that. And one other point, though, about the Chargers, and that I'm sticking to this point where I thought they're going to be a playoff team. And yes, I want Jim to make it happen, but it's a different Chargers team than in the past. You have to admit that Sunday night, a team that gave up that lead to the Bengals in previous regimes, we've seen sort of fold and lose that game. Finding a way to win that game was impressive.
Take your word for it. Didn't see it.
So it was. I know that you.
I know it happened. I'm just saying. I have no feeling on
it. That's all right.
Yeah,
that's all right. And the Chargers at the end of that game had multiple chances and really almost. I mean, they went 3 and out in what looked like was going to be their last chance, and instead got it. But I'm feeling the Chargers at home in this one. It just feels like this is maybe their moment. The Ravens licking their wounds. Although you mentioned it, what they did to Russell Wilson, and also remember the pick in the end zone from Russell Wilson. Also, that was the Ravens. The Ravens really, really played well defensively in that game. I mean, so much so that Russ was battered, as you mentioned. But I'll say the Chargers here. This is a statement, sort of a moment for Jim and what this Chargers can be. That's certainly what it feels like right now.
I'm taking a tie. They're going to tie.
I like it.
They're going to tie, and then they'll meet in the AFC Championship game. How about that?
That's great.
Right.
A tie.
I've seen the script. That's what it is.
Well, they say a tie is equivalent to kissing your brother, right? So
right, something like that. Well done. All right. I need a nap. That's going to do it for us. This is a week 12 and a half edition, whatever you want to call it, of Thinking Out Loud. Be sure to like, subscribe, do all those fun things. And we shall be back. La semana que viene, as people say. We'll be back next week for a special Thanksgiving week, not day, because we're not masochists, edition of this very pod. So long, everybody. For Sam Batesh, I'm Andrew Siciliano.